Hello, and welcome to Monumental, where we sit down with entrepreneurs, leaders, visionaries, and big thinkers making monumental change. Here's your host, Evan Holiday.
Welcome to Monumental. I'm your host, Evan Holiday, and today we have on the show with us Rick Sapio. Rick, great to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, very glad to have Rick on. So Rick and I met a few weeks back at Jake and Gino's Multifamily Mastery in Orlando. And, I'd heard a few of your podcasts, Rick, and heard of your interviewing 40 billionaires and then got to see you in person on stage. And it was phenomenal. I was like, man, we have to get this guy on Monumental because he is really, truly making massive change in the world. And so I'm really excited to have you on today.
Thank you. So it's really Morgan who works for us that made this happen, Evan, more than me. So we can thank Morgan publicly.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Morgan. So a little bit about Rick before we get started. Rick is the founder and CEO of a financial holding company, Mutual Capital Alliance, MCA, which has more than 100 investments in the past 24 years. He's also the founder of the Business Finishing School and the Business Finishing School Summit. And I had the pleasure of meeting Rick just recently, like we talked about, and just seeing him on stage was phenomenal. So I would love to just dive right into kind of your background, Rick, and tell a little bit about who you are.
Cool. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be on the show and to, hopefully influence your listeners as many people have influenced me. And I don't know how far back to go, but I will say as the seventh of 10 kids growing up in North Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey, in the 70s. I was born in 1963, but in 1975, when I was 11, short of my 12th birthday, my dad came home from dinner or for dinner and said that he had incurable cancer. And it was one of these line in the sand moments for me and for our family. They gave him 6 weeks to live on the first visit to the doctor. Unfortunately, he never went to the doctor. So by the time he went, he had cancer in his brain and in his bones and in his liver, etc. But the interesting thing was he ended up living for 2.5 years, and it was during that time that he taught all of the kids about life and about success and about grit. And I'm happy to say, fast forward 40, let's see, he died in 1977. So what is it, 42 years? And we don't have a single divorce in our family. And our family, for the most part, is thriving, which is pretty incredible. And so I would ask everyone listening, why is it that what potentially could be a really dark situation oftentimes turns out the opposite of what you would think? And I think about it now as a dad with 4 kids. Parents, for the most part today, put pillows under their kids' asses just so in case they fall down. They don't want their butts to touch the ground, which is the exact opposite of how we should be raising our kids, which is to make them fierce and courageous in the world, not, um, you know, uh, dependence that we drive around from sporting event to sporting event, which, by the way, I will not do. I will absolutely not do. People call me a bad parent, but my job is to raise an independent entrepreneur, not someone who sits in the back seat uh, playing on their iPhone, going to the next sporting event. So anyway, it was this chaotic childhood that caused me to look at life from the perspective of I don't want that chaos in my future. And so, starting at the age of 11, I started getting mentors, and I've had mentors my whole life. And my first mentor was an engineer who said, get an engineering degree. It'll teach you how to think. You could be a business person, a doctor, a lawyer. You could work on Wall Street. And so ever since that time, without any direction as a young person, I had this person telling me and pointing me and saying, you can have this amazing life if you become an engineer. So that began this pattern in my life of, I don't want the chaos from childhood. I want to try to figure out as much as I can patterns and systems and ways of thinking and ways of being that will have some predictability towards success. And my whole life's been about that one quest. which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yes, I love that. I think I think you're dead on with how children are raised today, and kind of putting that pillow under the kid's ass, like you mentioned. You see that a lot, and I guess a question I would have is, how does it make sense to, I guess, or how do you replicate that, the learning that you had, without maybe putting children through that chaotic experience that you, like you said, you never want to experience again?
Well, one thing is we have this decision-making lens that we've developed over years called simplicity, probability, and leverage, which is the basis for how I think about my family and my business life. And simplicity is all about using simplicity as an operating principle, not just a slogan or a value, but an operating principle. How do you simplify everything? And it's something that I think about daily. But probability is probably the most important one. Probability is whatever the stated objective is, you need to make decisions that increase the probability of hitting that objective. So an example for us, going back to what you said about kids, my wife and I constantly, in fact, just before this call, I was talking to her and this topic came up. Um, what Every decision we make has to increase the probability that we hit the stated objective of creating independent, entrepreneurial 18-year-olds that could support themselves. And I tell my kids that all the time. And so on the family placemat, which I know you have a copy of, my wife and I created this, and it sits on the dinner table. But under our family constitution, it says we are independent, entrepreneurial children, and we expect no free rides in life, and we expect no inheritance from mom or dad. We have told our kids we're not paying for college, and you have to figure out a way to pay for college. So with that in mind, how does travel sports and me taking a weekend off to take one son to New York and my wife taking the other son to the West Coast for a hockey tournament, how does that make them entrepreneurial, independent 18-year-olds? So we just put the kibosh on all that kind of stuff. But what we did instead was we bought a rental property down the street that our kids take care of, and they don't get any equity in it, but they can earn equity by working on the house. Um, so just that simple idea could be an aha moment for your listeners, like, holy shit,
Yeah.
how is my son traveling across the country playing soccer going to help him or her, or my son or daughter? How will it help them become independent business people? Now you might say, well, sports is really important to us, and that's great. So I'm not pushing my values on you, but I would go back to whatever you want in your life and in your business, make decisions that increase that probability. So, and then the last thing is leverage. I think we often do things that don't leverage our existing networks, our existing technology, our existing platform. And so we're adding things to our lives and our businesses that don't really add leverage. And so simplicity, probability, and leverage are the three cornerstones of how I operate.
I love that. And what you said about the team sports and your all's kids, your and your wife's kids, is as soon as I heard that, I think it was on Jake and Gino podcast. I immediately like called Jeanette, my fiance, and I was like, this aligns perfectly with what we're thinking. Like I played team sports growing up, but I think our vision of our family, we don't have kids yet, but we're going through that same thought pattern of you. Is like, what is our ideal living situation? What is our ideal life? Like, what objectives do we want for our families, our family, and what kind of values do we want to have for our kids? And we're thinking that exact same thing of how can we instill an entrepreneurial mindset into them at, as early as possible, so that they can go off and conquer the world in their own right.
Yeah, so what we do is we don't mind them playing sports at school after school, but we don't do any of the club things or the town type things. And we've got 4 kids, and it could be very busy. Uh, yeah, I could look everybody in the eye right now and say I've never once interrupted a family dinner for a sporting event or practice. So we have family dinner every night where we talk about things on the family placement. We talk about life. I just printed, in fact, today, an article that I'm going to read at tonight's dinner. Um, and is that better that my kids have had thousands of opportunities to hear articles? Or is it better that they're sitting in the back of the car eating McDonald's French fries?
Yeah.
I would say you make that decision for yourself. For us, we've determined that having guests and business owners and leaders from Dallas around the table with us several times a week is better. And I don't
And
mean to say that facetiously. I've had friends tell me, no, it's better that they're in the back of the car eating McDonald's because sports are that important to us.
yes.
All of the time, I've got 44 nieces and nephews. All of the time, every single time, as they got older, they've told me that they regretted that. So
Interesting. And for those listening, he was holding up his family dinner placemat, which is this huge laminated sheet of paper with all of his family quotes, his family constitution, his family core values, Benjamin Franklin's virtues. It really is like it's the all-encompassing kind of roadmap for your family. Is that right?
yeah, so my dad died young, and I told my wife, I don't know if I'm going to live past 50. So if I don't, I just want the family to know what we stand for. And so we invented this. It didn't exist before. It's got our meeting rhythms and our family prayer and parental rules and all kinds of stuff. So thousands of people have taken this from us and made it their own, which we appreciate. But this kind of thought process, imagine if you had a placemat for your business and what you wanted your business legacy to be, and everybody's singing off the same sheet of music. It radically transforms where you're going. So my passion in life is legacy, and I like to teach people, don't think about today. So for you and Jeanette, if you were to imagine the year is 2080, and you just write a paragraph. Me and Jeanette are having coffee. Our great grandchildren are running around us. We're sitting in a cabin in Colorado. Um, it's snowing outside, and you have that clear vision of a future. Then when you get into a fight next week, you're not running for the exits. That future becomes your anchor, and there's not enough in that of that in our society. Our society is so short term that it's absolutely killing us. I think I mentioned on stage 19 billion pills per month for mental issues per month in the United States. Think about that.
Yeah, that's
It's
powerful.
insane. I was going to take 19 billion pills and put them in a truck container just to show people how much that is. That and why are we doing that? Because I believe we don't have something to live for.
Yeah,
So
and I guess something I think about, I feel like from my perspective, I feel like a lot of people that are listening to this are on the way towards putting those objectives and seeing that like future vision and putting that into place. But I feel like maybe some people, maybe stop along the way or don't fully build out that vision or don't put in enough time on the front end to really get clear on that. What advice would you have for listeners?
there's no margin in life anymore. It's just you wake up, that device is, beeping at you, and you just go from thing to thing to thing to thing with no margin to think. And so the advice I have is an exercise that I've developed after I met the 44 billionaires and found out that they have a tremendous amount of time. They've always had time because they just focus on whatever their 5 core priorities are. So what I've developed for my wife and I is I'm like, honey, if I'm not doing these 5 things, which are my priority, you call me out. And so those 5, it's right on my hand. My thumb represents my relationship to my wife. My index finger represents my health and fitness. My middle finger is my business and purpose work, which would involve this phone call. Uh, my ring finger represents my key relationships, and then my pinky represents my learning and growth, which is a commitment. So if I'm awake, I want to only be doing those 5 things. Now my palm represents my creator because I do a lot of prayer meditation, and I want to be anchored in that. But here's the catch. The vast majority of us, when we're awake, we're not doing our priorities. So
Right.
uh, it's funny, my mother-in-law, I was having a conversation with her last week. I picked up her phone. Her average screen time on her phone, this is a retired person, was 6.5 hours a day. And
Wow.
guess what? She's about half of the average American, which is 11 or 12 hours a day, looking at all types of screens.
Wow.
That's not their palm. That is everything but what is a priority. So you're to answer your question directly, you could start with figuring out what your priorities are in your life and only doing that. That simple little change will have a monumental, exponential impact like no other. As it has for me, I have a very I'm full. My life's full, but it's never chaotic. Um, I just I love my life.
So does that circle back to you're sitting down with you said 44 billionaires?
hmm hmm
Is that what that comes from, that mindset of where you've gained this learning of simplicity and probability and leverage?
That all of this thinking really came from watching my older siblings and watching my mother and father and how they worked. I just had this allergic reaction to chaos. And all that thinking started. I remember at the age of 16, my brother got into business with his best friend. He was 11 years older than me. And I made this, just check the box. I will never, ever, ever get in business or hire a friend or family member in my life. And here I am at the age of 56. And that happened 41 years ago. And I've never hired a friend or family member in my business. So I tend to look for patterns of chaos and just do the opposite of that. So all of this is a reaction to. Now, I would tell you, and this is a big wake-up call for everybody, as it was for me, very rarely do human beings make conscious decisions. And there's a great book on this by Charles Duhigg. It's called The Power of Habit, where he says 98% of what you and I do and all of us do on a daily basis is completely unconscious and habitual. But if you were to remove that layer and actually make conscious decisions, holy shit,
Yeah.
people would be terrified of that. Like, why would I want to make a conscious decision? I've got to respond to these Facebook posts and these texts and these voicemails and there's nothing conscious about that. But if you actually woke up and said, wait a minute, my brother or sister or best friend, they're toxic. They don't belong in my life. But people are afraid to be conscious, I think.
And I to compound on that, I think, going back to like your childhood, your chaotic childhood, I think sometimes people wait until something chaotic happens in their life and then they decide to wake up. But there's ways that we can, break that habit. Like you're saying, remove distractions, make your life more simple. A big wake up call for me was my mom passing away at a young age of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just just blew my whole mind open, as far as I want to make sure I'm cherishing the time I have with my loved ones, and also making as big of an impact as I can, because I don't know how much time I have.
Sure.
But I hope it doesn't come to that for other people. But just trying to find ways that you can become more conscious in the time you have right now.
It's interesting that you say that. You have a very conscious way of being, which I noticed when I met you. But it's funny, science says that it's very rare that people wake up unless something catastrophically negative happens. Cancer, loss of a limb, loss of a loved one, massive accident, 9/11. And isn't that sad that it takes an event outside of us to make us
Yeah.
wake up? And that really makes me sad. So one of the reasons why we started Business Finishing School, which is not really about business, it's really about living an immense life, and having simplicity, probability, and leverage as operating principles, which is hard to do. It's almost like learning a language. But the reason why I started it was I was so passionate about helping business owners and just people in general wake up to the possibility of a conscious life. So that's why we did it, and we started 10 years ago, and it's been a fun ride. We're about to do our 17th event, which is pretty cool.
And that's
But
in Dallas in a few months.
yeah, it's the beginning of March in Dallas. It's a weekend event, but I want everybody to know, if you like the life you have and you don't feel like you need to be more conscious that this is not the event for you. And a lot of people just kind of like life the way it is, even though it's a chaotic mess. But if you zoom out, I would say the first step in all of this is being crystal clear on your purpose, having a purpose statement. And a purpose statement is something that's inside of you that you have to peel the onion to get to. And then the second thing is having your operating values for your life clear. And those are also inside. I think they're in your DNA. Once you have those two things, you just took a massive leap toward living a conscious life, in my opinion.
So how do you, I imagine you go through this in the business finishing school and the summit. How would you recommend our listeners get clear on their purpose statement and their core values?
I would say it starts with accountability. So we live in a culture where people say they want to do something, but then things get in the way. So I think there's three steps, and none of this is that magical. It's funny. Uh, Losing weight isn't that hard. All you have to do is eat less and exercise more. But 60% of us are fat. And the same goes true here. It's really pretty straightforward. So there's three steps to permanent change, in my opinion. You need to declare what it is that you want to change. Number two, you need to follow a program of some type. And once you get those two, you think, okay, so I got the goal, I want to lose weight. I've got the program, it's Weight Watchers. But the third step everybody misses, and that is an accountability partner that's going to be with you daily, holding you accountable. So inside Business Finishing School, we put people in accountability groups because without accountability, nothing will happen. And I'll tell you that for anything, your marriage, your health, your business, your income, your net worth, if you don't have an accountability partner, the odds of it happening are much lower.
And also finding, I think to add on to that is finding people that are also looking to change themselves, and you can fuel upon that and you can push each other in that accountability format.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's two qualities to, I'll just say it. I get accused of being racist, so I'll be racist. There's a racism toward low expectations. And someone once accused me, they said, you only hang out with people that are very oriented around growth and that are very reliable. I'm like, yeah. And he said, well, what about all the other people in the world? I'm like, well, I guess I'm a racist. Yeah, in accountability and in accountability groups, you got to have two qualities. You have to be completely focused on learning and growth in your life, and you have to be reliable. And there's a lot of people that will never be reliable. They could never be a good accountability partner. There's a lot of people that, I kind of got everything I needed in college. I'm done learning and growing. So, yes, I'm a racist. I love those two qualities in people.
Well, that's I feel like that's the good kind to be. So going into Mutual Capital Alliance, you've invested in and been a part of over 100 companies now. Is that right?
Yes, so we started 26 years ago. I was 29 when I started it as a holding company, really to make investments. And if you remember, we started in 94, so the investments in January, so 2 months from now, we'll be 26 years old. But we started initially making internet investments in financial services companies. And the first few years, we got really lucky, at least we thought, until the market crash in 99, which was brutal. But since then, we've expanded. We've done almost every kind of different investment, from a play on Broadway to parking garages, hotel, real estate, medical devices, et cetera, et cetera. Now we focused our attention primarily to scalable financial services products that are good for people long term. And it's a very tight box now because we think that people are just bad investors in general, and they don't take care of long-term wealth building. So that's been my focus, which is probably one of the reasons why I got on Jake and Gino's radar.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, listening to your your vision and also how you've been able to grow such a pretty substantial holding company based on a lot of the things you've learned from your mentors. It was a pretty amazing story. And so I guess the next question I want to ask is how do you pick your companies? What is like the one or two things that really stand out at you as being what you look for?
Yeah. So in our funds that invest, we actually touch about 400 different opportunities before we invest in one on average. And that touch could be an email, could be a phone call, could be a meeting. But in general, we'll have about 10 meetings. 10 companies that will focus on meeting and doing deeper due diligence. So just imagine a funnel with 400 going down to 10, and then that 10 being one investment. Um, the number one thing we look for is a long-term oriented leader that we believe can take it all the way to the end. And that is very hard to find. So there's certain metrics that you look for in leadership. And when it comes to liquidity events, which is what we're after, experience, having done that before, repeatedly, having a history of success, being someone that leads a relatively simple, straightforward life, someone that doesn't have a history of failure. But the most important thing is the leader. The second most important thing is the trend. We're looking for certain business trends. So you want to get involved in things that are on trend, not off trend. But I would say overwhelmingly, one company comes to mind in our fund. We invested in 2005, this business. We had the wrong leader. We met with bankruptcy attorneys. We were going to go bankrupt in 2008 when the market crashed. It was a medical device. We scoured the United States to find the best leader, hired this person in 2009, and sold the company 4 years later for $173 million. That's what the right leader can do.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if I'm giving you enough information, but then the last thing is, we believe in 12 foundational principles of business, which are the basis for business finishing school. And we ask the companies to follow these 12 foundational rules, starting with the company has a crystal clear purpose. The company has a catalyzing statement. We don't use mission statement or vision. We use catalyzing statement. I did a TED talk on this. You can Google that. It's a TEDx and my name, you'll see. And then they follow very clear rhythms and systems that we advocate. And it goes on from there. But, it's funny. I always think about, you got this company called McDonald's. And
Yeah.
in thousands of places all over the world, a 16-year-old opens in the morning. A 16-year-old closes at night, and billions of dollars are moving around the globe. That's what systems do.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned McDonald's because that was immediately the first company I thought of when you mentioned great leaders, because their now former CEO was phenomenal leader as far as getting them into the digital age, but then, made one mistake, and him leaving the company because he was such a great leader lost them, I think, billions of dollars in market cap overnight.
Yeah. Yep, it's unfortunate. So if you recall on stage, when I think about the hand thing, I want you to imagine, everybody listening, if there was a video camera next to your bed and it recorded everything you did and everything you said from the time you got up at 5 a.m., because I know all of you got up at 5 a.m. this morning, and just followed you every minute, all day long. What'd you do? Who'd you talk to? What'd you say? What'd you ingest? What'd you think about? Because your thinking is what determines what comes out of your mouth. What'd you do with your time? What videos or whatever did you watch? And all the way till the time you went to bed, 7 days a week for a whole week. What percent of your time is a complete and total waste? And if you agree with Charles Duhigg, he would say 80% of everything you do on a daily basis is a total waste of time. And that could be a massive opportunity to have, using Evan's word, monumental improvement.
Yes, I love it. So so as far as that brings up something I wanted to ask you is, I guess, what, like today, for example, use today as an example. What does your day look like on a normal basis?
So I work out every morning. I have a trainer. We do 30 sets in 30 minutes. So I got up at 4:45, had my gym bag packed the night before, went straight to the gym, worked out with him. Um, my oldest son, who's 11, is in this math uh, camp that he goes every Friday morning. So I picked him up at 7 a.m., took him to his math camp. Then I had my YPO forum. I'm in a weekly forum. We do it for an hour every week on Friday morning. So we went over our goals and objectives for the week. Um, and then I'm working on this charity event with my wife. So I had a call with her, and then I had the call with you. So that was today. I do not uh, take any calls ever, so everything's scheduled. So my day is very scheduled in advance. It's funny. I had this guy. He recently died. It's a sad story, but about 5 years ago. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys on stage, but he called me up. He drove me absolutely nuts. He's like, "I want to pay you $10,000 and sit next to you, and I want to know what you do on a daily basis." And I'm like, "You want to pay me 10 grand?" I go, "Listen, I have a very boring life." He's like, "I don't believe that. I want to pay you." And about a year later, I go, "You know what? All right, you're driving me nuts. Here's my schedule." I emailed it to him. "If you still want to hang out with me for a day and pay me 10 grand, great." So I sent him my schedule, and he's like, "I want to do it." So this is a funny story. Maybe I should tell this story more because it's pretty funny. So this knucklehead sat next to me all day. I had a couple of meetings where I left to go, and he came with me. And at the end of the day, I go, "How was it?" And he's like, "I wanted to see you put out fires. I wanted to see you like how you negotiate." And it was boring as hell because you did exactly what was on your calendar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Is that odd to you? Like, why wouldn't I do it on my calendar?" He goes, "Nobody does that." But I plan it all out and just do my calendar. So um, I would say that's kind of a secret to life in 2019 or 2020 because
Yeah.
people's lives are like, for the
Yeah.
most part.
I 1,000% agree. I think so. Going through that, I've kind of gone through that transition myself where, I did kind of run from the seat of my pants. And then I got really crystal clear on saying, hey, going through, I need to block out my calendar. I need to prioritize my time. I need to actually like put aside time for the 5 things that are most important to me. And doing that was just literally monumental as far as my ability to get more things done, to be more fulfilled, to actually strive towards my goals more quickly and get further faster. So I completely recommend that to everybody listening is, set aside time on a weekly basis, even on a daily basis, to make sure you're like forward thinking with your time.
Yeah, I would say just before you go to bed, block your next day and honor it. But I've learned people are listening to this and they're going, "Yeah, that's interesting what he said. I should do that." But I've learned that people very rarely make the same mistake twice. They normally make it 40 or 50 times. They keep they keep doing the same nonsense over and over and over, expecting a different result. So time blocking goes back to Aristotle and Plato. It works. So you just got to have the discipline. So it's funny. My wife was never really a disciplined person, and I mean, she's this creative person. She's amazing, and she's raising our 4 kids. But she's seen the benefit of it and completely shifted. She is more regimented than I am. So whenever somebody says, "I'm not that type of person," I would simply say that they're full of shit. That
Yeah.
if you want to continue to get what you've always gotten, then continue to do what you've always done. I mean, it's an old uh, quote from, I think, Albert Einstein said that. But anyway.
So how would you recommend our listeners only make one mistake or only fail once?
Well, what I try to do is when something happens and I see, like, for example, my brother getting in business with his best friend and it being a catastrophic failure, and me
Right.
noticing that, I just made a decision. I'm not doing business. I'm not hiring friends or family inside my business, uh, as an example. But having rules that you live by from seeing around you. They say experience is one teacher, but wisdom, experience is learning from your own mistakes. Wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. So I would say picking a path. What we tell people inside business finishing school is, if you're going to do it, do this. Don't do this and that and all these other programs and try to amalgamate. Just pick a path. And so I would say that all of us have been exposed to something that makes sense to us and follow that one, as opposed to, a mistake would be trying to do too many things at once. I think it's similar to learning a language. It takes 4 years, they say, if you study every day to speak a language fluently, but you don't take 5 languages at the same time. You take one if you want to get fluent in it. So it's the same thing here. So a mistake would be trying to take on too much at once. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but that's what
No,
came to mind.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It goes back to that like immersion of, finding mentors first, and then totally immersing yourself into that, so that way you can really hone in on whatever that one specific thing is, and learning from other people's mistakes, like you said, but really honing in on that one specific thing and immersing yourself in it.
It also boils down to choice is another thing. I don't know, there's 100 examples of this, but I feel like we've lost the ability to choose as a society. And what I mean by that is, when I chose my purpose, which was to inspire entrepreneurship, that means every other option went away. When I chose my wife to be my partner for life, every other option went away. But people are so reluctant to choose a career, to choose a purpose, to choose a spouse, to choose a direction, to choose a value. Had people tell me often, I know your number one value is simplicity, but I value so many things. We've lost the ability to just choose. And when you choose, there's so much freedom.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people, if their career is going to be around multi-family marketing, or multifamily investing, whatever aspect of it,
Right.
you get the point. I don't know why I said multi-level marketing, but so if you're an investor in multifamily properties, as an example, choose it and be the best in the world at it. Like my friend Carlos, I have a friend Carlos, owns a firm here in Dallas called Conti, and came to America from Brazil with $300 in his pocket, and now has 11,000 doors.
Wow.
Only 10 years later. And you can look up Conti; they're phenomenal. I'm an investor in them, but he just chose. He said, "This is my path. I know I have 1,000 opportunities in America. I don't speak the language that well, but I'm going to pick this career, this spouse, this city, and all the other options go away." And think about how much clarity that gives you and how much freedom.
Yeah.
But I will go back to what I said at the beginning. We have decided as a culture that we're just not going to choose. So
We're going to let life choose for us.
mm-hmm.
You're exactly right. And I could not agree more. I think for me, I went through that same cycle of not being clear. And as soon as I got clear, so my statement in my head is empowering others through attainable housing. And for me, that is like, I was like, yes, I resonate with that. I get excited about that. I get pumped up about that. Like, I want to make this massive impact in the world. And that statement to me gets me going every morning.
And it
And
also, it's funny that you have that statement, because it also informs what things present themselves in your lives. Like when you were in college, I read about it, your that deal that presented itself. Those kind of things happen. I love the quote, when you're clear about where you're going, providence moves. So
yeah, exactly right. I mean, it is powerful. And I pass that along to all of our listeners. Getting so clear, crystal clear on your purpose statement and your catalyzing statement, as Rick calls it, is so powerful. It just literally moves mountains for you. And you're like, oh, now I get it. I see where I'm going. I see the finish line. I see the life that I want to live right ahead of me.
This is an overused one, but I think in this context it makes sense. So when Kennedy said we're going to send a man to the moon and return him safe to the earth by the end of the decade of the 60s, when you're that clear on a statement, which he didn't have to say that, We could have just continued fumbling around trying to beat the Soviets. But when you say something with clarity like that, what happens is when things come forth like, hey, got this new, an engineer invents a material or a machinery or something that helps get to the moon. The head engineer says, well, is that going to work to get someone back by the end of the decade? No, I need about 10 years worth of development. Nope. So it makes your no decisions really fast. So 99% of what comes into your life will not match your clarity of your objective. So what does that mean? It means you're saying no so fast that it's propelling you in the direction that you've declared. And that's what clarity does.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, Rick, I wanted to jump into more of the 44 billionaires, but we'll have to save that for another episode. I had a blast on today's episode. Let's jump into our monumental questions. What does success mean to you?
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. So that's a kid's song, but it was really invented for adults, that life is meant to be a dream and it's meant to be downstream, not fighting upstream. So success to me is living a life in alignment with your core purpose and your values, which is a lot more fun.
Yeah, I resonate with that. What I actually, I think we already talked about your morning routine or your daily rituals. It's the getting up early, 5 a.m. club, and working out 30 minutes with 30, what did you say, 30 sets?
30 sets in 30 minutes. Yep, it's quick. It goes by really fast when you do it that way.
I love it. And then finally, what about favorite book or book you're currently reading?
Wow. So funny, I'm reading a book called The Opposite of Spoiled right now because our kids are 5, 7, 9, and 11. But one of the best books I've read recently, I read every word of this damn book. It was so huge. It's the book called Hamilton, which the play was based on. It's the one
Right.
by Chernow. And yeah, you read this book, it's shocking how a man with 8 kids could create our government. Literally, he created the government. He's the one that did research in, Greek and Italian history way back 2,000 years and decided on how our government would be laid out with the 3 different functions. And I think it was 4 back in the Greek times, but he decided we'll just do 3 here. And this guy single-handedly created the United States of America. Let me not be that, because it took a lot of people, but his thought process and his work ethic, he was a 100-hour-a-week guy 250 years ago. Shocking. You read that story and you think, where would we be without Alexander Hamilton? So that's a good one.
That's powerful. Well, Rick, thank you again for being here. Phenomenal episode on Monumental. Where can our listeners follow you or reach out to you?
www.businessfinishingschool.com, and you can email us at info@businessfinishingschool.com. I'd love for you to come to our live events. They're not expensive at all. We've been doing them for years, and if you like this thought process, you'll get a whole lot more.
Yes, I love it. Guys, take Rick up on that. Rick is a phenomenal speaker. It really just, like this episode today, we boiled it down to, really what it takes to live your life on purpose and make monumental change in the world. So Rick,
Yep.
Thank you again for your time.
You're
Really
welcome,
phenomenal.
Evan. I'm just going to leave you with one thought. Take your life very, very seriously, but never yourself.
Yes, I love it. Well, guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it on social media. Wherever you're listening to this, tag Rick, tag Business Finishing School, tag myself. And with that, have a monumental day.